I'm Lida Nedilsky, a sociologist at North Park University, and I'm going to be giving a talk on surviving summer and living through war in Ukraine. In the year 2023-2024, I was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Warsaw in Poland, and at the end of my time there, I decided to spend the month of July in Ukraine. It's the very first time I had been to the land where my parents were born, and I went alone. So the agenda for today, 4 stories. 4 stories that will reflect people I met in the time that I was traveling across Ukraine. First, we'll get a sense of orientation with a map. Then I'll introduce you to Vera the vet, Raman, who's stubborn little Raman, Maya the master pickler, and Veronica wise beyond her years. So this is a map of Ukraine, and in order to get into Ukraine, you can't fly in. The skies are dangerous. So one of the few cross-border points is the space between Kraków, the old capital of Poland, and Lviv, which is the town where my mother was from. So once I was done at the University of Warsaw, I traveled south by train to Kraków, and then I took a bus to Lviv. It was a 4-hour journey, but we also had to spend 4 hours at the border. 4 hours sounds like a long time, which it is, but other people have spent more than 20 hours at that same checkpoint under far worse conditions. So from Lviv in western Ukraine, I traveled by train to Khmelnytsky. That's where Vera the vet is from and Maya the master pickler. From Khmelnytsky, I traveled further north and east to the capital, Kyiv, by train. And then I took a long-distance bus east 100 kilometers to Yahotin. And then I also traveled west of Kyiv to Novi Korohot, where Veronica is from. Raman, stubborn little Raman, is from Yahotin. And then finally, on my way back, I went to the town where my father is from, called Ivano-Frankivsk. I don't have any characters from that part of the country, but maybe next time I will. So let's look at Vera the vet. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention. I took notes. As someone who loved as a child to keep a diary, as someone who writes letters and sends postcards, this is the way that I remember. This is even how I remember for academic purposes. I keep a daily diary, and I spend a lot of time on the details, and they help me create these stories for you. So one thing that I want to emphasize, the reading of these stories, the presentation of the stories is in honor, in recognition of the 3rd anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. That was February 24th, 2022. And I'm really grateful that you're here with me because it's difficult to observe the start of a war and not its end. And to have you with me is very, very special. Here I have some slides of places where there are still the scars of war. This is from Borodyanka, a place west of the capital, Kyiv, that I visited. And the stories I'm going to share, while involving loss, involving death for some of the people, they're not as dark as stories can be. And I think it has a lot to do with the needs of the people right now, the needs of people to share what they survived. So while we may have images of the scars, of the deaths, of the continued struggle, my stories, I hope, will give you a broader sense of real people and highlight their humanity. So first of all, Vera the vet. Have you ever discovered something simply by walking a little bit farther than you'd ever ventured before? Well, I hadn't realized until my last day in the village that Vera the vet lived immediately opposite my friend Maya's house in Ostashke, Khmelnytsky Oblast. A metal gate and fence concealed the private realm of buildings and gardens that belonged to her. A simple, rutted dirt path separated Vera's property from Maya's. And that's why Vera was among the first people I got to know while in Ukraine. She was over every day to chat with her neighbors, to share food, and to unburden her heart to me. Why me? Perhaps because I was an outsider whose judgment couldn't harm. Or maybe because I was a good listener, hanging on her every word as I worked to understand the particular mix of Ukrainian and Russian characteristic of Khmelnytsky's Surzhyk, which is a blended language. It might have been a matter of my size and sex, but I've also been told there's an openness about me that marks me as different, at once keen and approachable. So Vera chose me to hear her story of being pushed to the margins of Ostashke. As a veterinarian recently retired, she was still the one neighbors sought when they had trouble with an animal. Her profession placed her at the center of this rural community. But from a proud mother of a trained medic, she had become a mourning mother of a fallen soldier in a divisive war. And from a faithful member of the Orthodox Church, she had become a traitorous outcast of orthodoxy. Like a 1-2 punch, the hits came in quick succession when her only son was killed in the opening days of 2022 in the Donbass, eastern Ukraine. He'd been in active service providing medical care to injured soldiers there since 2014, what Ukrainians reckon as the start of the war. And then, with the full-scale invasion in late February, the priest at her Moscow-affiliated Ukrainian Orthodox Church began referring to Ukrainian soldiers as fascists and enemies. Until this moment, the link to Russia hadn't mattered in this small community, but now it mattered to Vera. Because her only son had died for Ukraine, here in rural Ukraine, 1,000 kilometers away from the Donbass and from Russia, she was shunned by the congregation of her church. Vera singled me out twice to unburden her heart of its load of memories. My diary entry: the first night was to tell of the loss of her son. The last morning was to show off her garden, her house, her family behind the fence. Then it was her daughter's and husband's turn to share what it meant to lose their only brother and son. They brought out photo albums. We studied every page. I searched for a smile and finally found one when the medics were enjoying a moment in their swim trunks. The last photos documented his death. A group shot of all the men and women, 10 or 12 medics who'd worked tirelessly together. The building in which they'd all been wiped from the face of the earth after taking a direct hit. The flames that consumed the building. The missile, unexploded ordnance, too wide to fit through the door. Vera said it took months to verify her son's death, to find physical evidence of his presence and his destruction. But friends managed to establish the facts. And now, the family went about the crucial task of remembering, Maya reminded Vera. In fact, Maya, my host from across the lane, had joined us in Vera's courtyard. And soon Hrihari, Maya's widowed father, was peeking over the gate too, waving the binoculars I'd given him as parting gift to enable his vigilance of the lane and its every activity. Let's take a geographic and generational leap and meet Stubborn Little Raman. Stubborn Little Raman is living east of the capital in Yahotin, which, being that close, 100 kilometers close to the capital, meant that Russian tanks had occupied the streets. People remember seeing them. People remember hearing stories from a few kilometers away. Raman doesn't live in Ukraine anymore. He lives in Poland. But he has good reason to visit Ukraine. So let me tell you about this character, stubborn little Raman. Starey Malay is a Ukrainian idiomatic expression for a boy who acts like a man. It's not simply a matter of a boy trying to be a man. I don't know if in English we have an equivalent. Something about him, his personality, the way he moves, exudes the attitude and provokes in you a knowing smile and shake of the head. That's stubborn little Raman to a T. It was in Krakow, Poland, early spring, that I first recognized it. We were celebrating the 17th birthday of Raman's elder half-sister, Diana, and I was carrying dirty dinner plates back to the kitchen. Raman, standing on a chair at the sink, was already washing dishes. He swung his head to the left, right, to indicate to me where I was to deposit my handful of plates, and he just kept on washing. Raman wasn't yet 6. 3 months later, we were reunited at his grandmother's and his father's duplex in Yahotin. So part of the house is occupied by his babcia Vera, his grandmother, and then the backside that we're seeing here in this photo is where his father, and when he visits, he and his mother and his sister stay. So this is an important place in his life. He grew up here, but he's no longer living in Yahotin with his father and his grandmother. So Yahotin is a place where I met him 100 kilometers east of the capital. And in that very same period, Kyiv's children's hospital was hit by a missile struck by Russian ordnance. While Raman's mother worked tirelessly and remotely for a tech firm in Ireland on her laptop upstairs, and his father drove from pig farm to pig farm serving as an electrician for a Chinese firm, I accompanied Raman from preschool to home if there was a red alert for missiles over Ukraine's skies, or from preschool to Ukrainian language tutorial if there was a scheduled lesson. In either case, it was far too hot for his grandmother to manage under the midday sun. In fact, by 5 a.m., when all the roosters and chickens and dogs in the neighborhood were making their usual morning racket, it was already too hot to be outside in the courtyard or working in the garden. Stubborn little Raman needed Ukrainian tutorials because he refused to speak in Ukrainian, let alone read or write. He'd call his father Papa in Russian and have to be corrected by his mother with Tato. And when it was safe to return permanently from Krakow to Yahotin, he would need Ukrainian literacy for school. But here in Ukraine for the summer, Raman preferred spending his days on TikTok. Raman was doing everything to avoid Ukrainian and stay under Russian influencers, and then he would parrot their swear words with colorful phrases to boot. Don't ask me how I knew, I just knew. When he wasn't on TikTok, Raman was doing everything to avoid schoolwork and Ukrainian language lessons. He'd terrorize the chickens or kidnap the cat rather than attempt the Ukrainian language puzzles that I made for him. One day, perhaps the hottest day, Raman's grandmother dragged out her kitchen rug for washing. It was to stay rolled up until the courtyard cooled with the setting sun, she informed us. But Raman had other plans. With the sun at its peak, he assembled buckets and bath soap and a bath brush. He pulled over the garden hose. He got to work on the rug and somehow managed to drag us into the act, including the cat. When that task was done, Raman got to work on the carp. Did I mention the carp? Frozen in a block of ice, the carp sat under a plastic crate to protect it from the cat in the sunny courtyard, supposedly thawing, but to no effect. So Ramen moved the fish into the kitchen, pulled up a chair, lifted the block of ice into the kitchen sink, and chipped away with a long knife until he'd freed the carp from its watery prison. That night we feasted on fried carp, cold Coronas, and a salad of my own invention, combining leafy greens and herbs from the garden, ripe apricots from the Ukrainian tutor's tree, fresh farmer's cheese from the fridge, and walnuts I'd brought with me from Khmelnytsky. We drank and told stories and laughed until it was pitch black and I couldn't see where my pistachios flew when I cracked their shells. The electricity had been cut with rationing, something we hadn't noticed when it was still daylight, and we didn't think to light candles or even use cell phones to illuminate the kitchen table at nightfall. We just continued feasting in the darkness. Hats off to stubborn little Ramen. Now, Budlong Woods Library, the branch of Chicago Public Library where I'm reading my stories, sits on land that used to be a pickle farm, right? And is named after the pickle farmer himself. So this next story has a special place in the imagination of folks attached to this particular library branch. And I too have an attachment. I'm looking forward in this next summer to returning to Khmelnytsky and sampling some of the work that Maya the Master Pickler did in my presence. So let me share a story of someone who is a little bit older than I. We're going back in time and space from northern Ukraine, a little bit south and west, to Khmelnytsky. Khmelnytsky, as I said with Vera the Vet, is a part of Ukraine very influenced by Russian language and Russian culture, even though it's not close to Russia. It's also a very interesting place because before it was called Khmelnytsky, it had a Jewish name. It was a shtetl, and the whole area was known for its Jewish culture. So there are a lot of interesting layers to the story of this part of Ukraine, and Maya also is a complex woman, a very interesting character. I don't want to oversimplify her and associate her with the pickles, and yet it really does suggest to me her sensitivity toward others, her attachment to the land, her work ethic, and again, this idea of sharing food and celebrating through food, celebrating in a difficult time, that's really what Maya is about. So let me tell you about Maya, the Master Pickler. By now, I think you've noticed that Ukrainians, regardless of their whereabouts in Poland or Ukraine, live with one foot on the city sidewalk and one foot in the soil. Maya is no exception. In the city of Khmelnytsky, she is an essential worker. That's why she as a woman remains there, even if she would rather be someplace else. She is an essential worker in the sense that she is a teacher of English at the Bogdan Khmelnytsky National Academy of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. Her students were among the first casualties of the Russian invasion, being unarmed border guards, as was the custom in Ukraine and Europe until 2022. She also edits an academic journal of linguistics and, time permitting, works with and mingles with fellow teachers as well as librarians, archivists, and museum workers. In the village of Ostashke, where Maya shares a house with her widower father, Hrihori, she tends the vegetable garden, feeds the chickens, harvests the walnuts, blackberries, and garlic, and jars the pickles. And in the house, she fries the blintzes, cooks the kasha, pours the cognac, and ensures every creature's comfort, whether human, dog, or cat. My grandmother used to tell bedtime stories about women like Maya who do it all. Come to think of it, I've seen Maya enact unknowingly some of these very stories. Ripka, or the giant turnip, right, for one. But if I were to craft one around the character of Maya, I'd center it on Maya the Master Pickler, right? So here are some pictures of Maya in action. On the left, hosting at her table with her father, Rehari, seated. In this case, he's pouring the cognac. The central panel is Maya in the garden, and the garden is huge. I mean, it puts most Americans to shame that she is a professional worker. She's taking care of her widower father, and she's responsible for that garden, for planting it, for tending it, for harvesting it, for making food out of all of those elements that emerge. And on the right is Maya in action in a dress that she wears all the time when she's out on the streets of the city. So she is everywhere, always doing something. And I'm really looking forward to seeing her again. But let's go back to this story. If I were to fashion a story around Maya, it would be as Maya the Master Pickler. The story would begin with our heroine in the verdant garden, right, where she's been up since dawn, wearing a plastic bag over her hair to protect it from the rain. Because how can you garden if your hands are holding an umbrella or pulling around a hood and stuff like that? She's very practical. She's weeding the rows of onions as well as keeping tabs on the pickles to ensure they're neither too big nor too small for picking. Once she's picked enough to fill 5 or 6 wide metal basins, she assigns to me the task of sorting and washing them. As her untested houseguest, I can at least be trusted with separating the puny from the substantial. Several plastic bags filled with unwashed pickles are set aside for Valentina, Maya's mentor and friend, who lives in town. Valentina is an elegant lady. Valentina once spent time in Texas, studying English with U.S. border guards. But she still enjoys a shot at pickling as much as a shot of cognac, or the opportunity to speak English with a foreign guest, like me. As Maya drives me and the pickles into town in her red VW Passat, avoiding potholes on the streets she knows like the back of her hand, the rain turns those streets into rivers. As Maya, overladen with plastic bags, walks the alleyways and climbs the stairs that bring her closer to Valentina, our heroine cheerfully marshals on. When Maya reaches Valentina in her apartment high above the street and introduces me, Valentina welcomes us with warm, dry shawls and a table set with cutlets, chocolates, cakes, and cognac. We toast every good thing: friendship, travel, health, love. I think we raise our glasses 5 times. So which toast have I forgotten? Victory. Victory, that's the one. We toast every good thing: friendship, travel, health, love, and victory. By this time, I too am pickled. But there's more to do, so Maya, the Master Pickler, drives us back to Ostashke. There she sets out on her front porch the sterilized jars, spices, garlic, salt, and clean pickles. We fill the jars to the max with pickles of comparable size before setting the jars to boil on the stovetop. There are many, many jars and even more pickles. The sky, all day drab with rain clouds, goes completely dark once we lose electricity. Again, Maya marshals on. Hrihari and I both solemnly pledge to stay with Maya until the end. No one rests until all the jars are sealed. No one sleeps until Maya quits her pickling. So, I spent time with retirees. I spent time with professionals. I spent time with kids. Being a mother, I think it's pretty normal to spend time with kids. I know my sons used to freak out if I talked to strangers on the street who were children, but being a mother, I think it's sort of natural to do that. And possibly because, again, I'm small, I'm inquisitive, I am interested. Even preteens and teens will talk to me. So Veronica and her brother, Stepan, were two preteens and early teen people with whom I spent several days. I was invited to visit their grandparents' home west of the capital, west of Kyiv, and it was a visit that I was a little apprehensive about because I would have to take a minivan. I would have to take a subway to a depot where various minivans shuttle people to different suburbs. And even though I know Ukrainian, I still was apprehensive about what it would mean to be on the roads and whether I would find my proper marshrutka, as they're called. But I arrived in Novy Korohod with my bag filled with cookies and a little bit of cash, and then I was told I was to stay for 3 days. And I hadn't packed for anything. I just thought it would be a day trip. So I spent quite a bit of time with Veronica, her grandparents, her mother, and her brother. And Veronica, out of all of these amazing people in her family, just struck me as someone I hope I know across her lifetime. So let me tell you the story of Veronica. Maybe you'll get a sense of why I like her so much. My fourth and final story concerns an 11-year-old girl, wise beyond her years. Like so many Ukrainian children, she is living out this war outside Ukraine. But unlike most, she is living with both her parents, as well as older siblings, because her father continues to work for the Ukrainian government in his official role as diplomat. In fact, the family was already stationed in Central Europe in January of 2022, weeks before the full-scale Russian invasion. But with school out and the summer holiday underway, July 2024, Veronica was back in Ukraine, like stubborn little Raman, on the other side of Kyiv, for time with her grandparents at their dacha in Novy Korohod, Kyiv Oblast. Novy Korohod is some 70 kilometers northwest of the capital. In the concentric rings of settlements considered Kyiv's suburbs, it sits along a common spoke with Irpin, Bucha, Borodyanka. You may recognize these names, but you might not recognize the name Korohod. That was a town evacuated with the Chernobyl nuclear disaster of 1986. Novy, or New Korohod, was built to house those evacuees, planned and neatly laid out with lanes and uniform homes like an American suburb. This is where I met Veronica. And like so many, she had a lot on her mind she wanted to share with me when we weren't playing ping pong or pai chi, which is a Chinese card game I taught to her and her elder brother Stepan. When we were outside doing yard work, such as picking blueberries, or feeding the juvenile turkeys and chickens, or watering the tomatoes and eggplants in the greenhouse, or the rose bushes and other shrubs in their yard that her father would like to have made into a golf putting green, we'd talk. In English, mostly stuff that matters to preteens, like theories for why some chickens kept by her grandparents have been aggressive and scary, and concerns about why a teacher assigned a particular grade to schoolwork that deserved better, and what to do when the urge to explain to that teacher how much time and effort had gone into that assignment, 4 hours worth of preparation for a 30-minute presentation, just could not be denied. Especially when it was just Veronica and I, the words poured out. Especially that time we went to the magazin, not sklep. Sklep in this part of Ukraine means family crypt. to buy bread and a watermelon. And this comes from my diary entry. We were discussing pedagogy, or the theories about how to teach, as it relates to language learning. It was a family fascination of all the members of the household, because everyone was working on German as well as English. For Stepan, Veronica's elder brother, English was the more successful acquisition. That meant having English language speaking school friends and enjoying sleepovers and dinner dates with classmates from Ireland and India. But he'd soon turn the corner with German, Veronica mused. In Veronica's case, German was now the language she thought with, even ahead of Ukrainian. Her language progress meant high marks in school, except for the 2 she'd earned instead of a 1 after a really strong presentation. Now, in Mother's case, Veronica considered, she struggled with both German and English. Best way to remedy that is just to speak. Get it out. Get it right or wrong and you'll learn. That's how all schools should teach. And if her mother mastered German or English, what would that mean to her? Well, if she knew German, then she could get a job, Veronica responded. And how might it affect her social life? Well, then she could have real friends among the people around her, the way Veronica did. She needed that more than she needed a job. When we returned home from our trek, I set the heavy watermelon awkwardly on the kitchen table. It's a 6-kilogram watermelon, Veronica announced. Translation, our foreign friend managed to schlep a 13-pounder. So these last images are from the dacha in Nowy Korohod, and we have Veronica's mother and grandfather and a neighbor in the wheat field trying to harvest the wheat. They paid a man to bring his harvester and gather that grain, but with just one circuit, there was a malfunction, and they don't have replacement parts handy. So I can't tell you what will happen to the wheat field, whether they'll try using a scythe to take it down, or they'll leave it standing. They've lost a lot of food as a result of the war, in part because of that initial invasion and displacement of people, and in part because so many members of families have left, and people still don't quite know how to plant less, how to produce less food than what they need for their particular number now, their reduced number. So it's a very awkward situation because Ukrainians feel this attachment to the land. It's what brings family members back in the summertime. Everyone has a job, everyone has a place in that world. And if they stop having this need for one another, this rhythm based on the seasons, they're really concerned about losing all connection to one another. One other interesting loss that I want to express through these tender stories is that many Ukrainians refuse at this point to keep live animals. They might keep some chickens, right? I mentioned chickens and juvenile turkeys. This is really important for people, for eggs and for meat, but they will not keep any more dairy cows or other larger animals because of what it means to lose them when they're abandoned or hurt. So the situation is certainly changing, but I wanted with my stories to give a sense of the strength of people, the curiosity of people, the habits that they have that keep them going. And I can't wait to see them again this summer. Thank you.